Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, yay. Perfect. I can hear you. Nice to see you.
You too, Carolyn. Good
Thank
morning.
you. Thank you, Dr. David Rosensweet, in person, in living color. Oh, that was fun. Okay, so here we are. And maybe we could do that again. That was fun. Question time. And I always like to talk about this one because it confuses a lot of women. And you give us great answers in regards to it. I'll get started. First question comes in. May we please discuss SHBG again, which stands for sex hormone binding globulin? Questioner says, mine is high and this is disconcerting. And I'm wondering if this is dangerous and also how it is I might be able to bring it down, or do I even need to bring it down? It's only three questions in there, but I think you well know enough to be able to explain this to us if you'd be good enough.
Sex hormone binding globulin is part of normal body function. And how it turns out that, when you drink water or you eat vegetables that have minerals in them, the minerals eventually get absorbed into your bloodstream and they travel around in solution. So when you salt your food, that salt dissolves, you swallow it, it gets into your stomach, your intestine, your bloodstream. And since the blood is primarily water, it's got a bunch of cells in it, but it's water. The salt that you ate just dissolves right into your blood. That's true for anything that dissolves in water. But there's other things that we need that are essential to us that they dissolve only in fat. For example, when you take vitamin D or vitamin A, these are fat-soluble vitamins. They don't float around in your bloodstream like fat globules. No, they have to be handled in special ways. And all the steroid hormones, in fact, almost every hormone that you can name, are fat-soluble. Estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, DHEA that come out of the ovary. These are fat-soluble hormones. That means when they are excreted by the ovary into the bloodstream, they can't float around like your salad dressing. If you let your balsamic vinegar dressing that's mixed with olive oil just sit there on your counter, and it's in a glass bottle, you'll see that there's two layers there. There's the balsamic vinegar layer, which is the water layer. And then there's this oil layer that's sitting on top of that balsamic vinegar layer.
Shake it, shake it, shake it.
And it's floating there. And that, that doesn't work in the bloodstream. You can't have fat droplets floating around in the bloodstream for a variety of reasons. But the body has developed wonderful mechanisms for dealing with that. It binds up anything that's fat soluble to proteins. So there are proteins floating around in our bloodstream. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. There's albumin. There's these things called globulins. Many people have heard of gamma globulin. That's an immune system active protein floating around in your blood. And there's these proteins that steroid hormones are bound to, and that allows them to be transported from their site of origin, such as the thyroid gland or the adrenal gland or the ovaries or the testicles. They get transported by, when they're excreted, they link up to these plasma proteins. And then they're delivered to wherever they're going to go, which is all over the body. And for example, when estrogen is affecting the brain, they're taken to the brain, bound to these plasma proteins, and then they're released from the protein and they get to go into the cell and do their thing. Transport. That's what these plasma proteins are about. And anything that's fat soluble needs to be transported around to different, and the usual mechanism is these transport proteins. And that's what sex hormone binding globulin is. It's a globulin, which is a large protein, relatively speaking. You can't see it with your eyeballs, and you see it under a microscope. You need
Right.
a super microscope to see it, but it's a large protein. And when the ovary produces and excretes estradiol, for example, it's bound to sex hormone binding globulin, plus other proteins. It's also bound to albumin. There's so much albumin that a lot of it turns out to be bound to albumin, even though it binds stronger to sex hormone binding globulin. So your ovary puts out estradiol. It's bound up immediately by a plasma protein known as sex hormone binding globulin and a few others. And that's how it travels around in the bloodstream, and it gets delivered everywhere it needs to be delivered. Now, let's say a young woman takes a birth control pill. So she's not only transporting things around in her bloodstream. One of the ways is through sex hormone binding globulin. She's taken in some extra hormones, because birth control pills contain estradiol and a progestin. And so she's now got her ovary production of estradiol. Well, if she's young, if she's 20 plus or minus a couple of years, that's the most robust production she'll ever do in her whole life. And then she's taking additional estrogen. Well, our bodies, we like the right amount of hormones, the optimal amount. We don't like too little. Don't like too little at all. Don't like too much. Well, the body has a natural protective mechanism. It can just produce some additional sex hormone binding globulin and bind up the extra.
So it's a protective.
Protective to a woman's body. She's not getting delivered to cells an excessive amount of estrogen. The combination of her robust ovarian output plus the additional estradiol that's coming in through the birth control pill, some of that's bound up. So it's a protective mechanism, and it's this wonderful, one of the many ways that the body balances things, keeps them in balance, not too little, not too much. Well, it turns out other steroid hormones happen to be bound to sex hormone binding globulin. Testosterone's one of them. And it turns out that sex hormone binding globulin has degrees of binding. It binds up testosterone is the most wonderful binding that occurs, the most vigorous binding that occurs. It'll even bind up testosterone and let go of, and not bind up as much estrogen, because testosterone in a woman is at the highest of binding affinity to sex hormone binding globulin. Estrogens are right up there. They're right up there with, and other things bind. Even thyroid binds to sex hormone binding globulin. Well, yeah, there's many young women who took the birth control pill, and some of them did that for sexual freedom, and they wind up losing their libido because the extra estradiol in the birth control pill caused an increase in a woman's sex hormone binding globulin, and it bound up the testosterone preferentially, and she lost some of her libido. I'm just giving you an example of how intricate and delicately balanced all these things are, and the orchestration is astounding if you let your mind just surrender to how amazingly we're set up. Let's come fast forward to menopause. When young women are on birth control pills and their sex hormone binding globulin elevates, when they stop taking birth control pills, theoretically, the sex hormone binding globulin should go back down,
right,
to its normal range. Well, it does so a lot of the time, but it does not do so all the time. So some women actually enter menopause, and they're entering with an elevated sex hormone binding globulin. And when we do very careful histories, we see what in the heck caused that, for God's sake. And for a significant number of these women, it was because they took the birth control pill for 1 month when they were 22. And they stopped it because they didn't like it. But their sex hormone binding globulin stayed elevated. Now, here's what I want to answer directly to this woman's question. This is not NOT, a disease.
Right.
This is a normal physiologic mechanism. It is not a disease. And so if in the menopause method, mandatory blood tests at the beginning of working with a woman include sex hormone binding globulin, because we run into this elevated sex hormone binding globulin just enough of the time that it becomes challenging, and we want to know what their baseline was prior to giving them hormones for treatment in menopause. Most of the time, that's irrelevant. Most of the time, they have a normal sex hormone binding globulin. It doesn't figure into the process at all in menopause. Sometimes we see a mild or even a moderate elevation of the sex hormone binding globulin, but it does not cramp our style. We proceed by treating women with the ovarian hormones exactly like we would as if they had a normal sex hormone binding globulin, because sometimes it just doesn't factor in. It
Right.
just doesn't become a problem. It doesn't interfere. And when they take the additional estradiol, for example, it does not elevate their somewhat elevated sex hormone binding globulin further, so it never becomes a problem. So I never make a big deal of it. I just notate in my mind what that number is. Sometimes, however, it is a problem. Sometimes the sex hormone binding globulin is elevated to an extent that it starts binding up the treating hormones that we're giving. Like a woman's having hot flashes and we're waking her up in the middle of the night, and she's got a very significant sleep disturbance. Well, we give her estrogen because we know, we give every woman estrogen without exception, but I'm just giving you the example of a woman who's waking up with hot flashes in the middle of the night. We know that it's from, in an untreated woman, that's from low estrogen. So we give her estrogen. And what's going to happen to that sex hormone binding globulin? Is that going to bind up that estrogen? Well, it might. In some cases, it might. And she's going to continue to have hot flashes. So what does she do? Or what does her healthcare provider do? Oh, you're continuing to have hot flashes. Here's some more estrogen.
Mm.
So she takes more estrogen, and she continues to have hot flashes. And what folks who are providers who are not aware of this, what's happening is as she takes some more estrogen, the sex hormone binding globulin elevates more. She still has hot flashes. Sex hormone, she takes more estrogen to alleviate the hot flashes. The sex hormone binding globulin elevates more. So it's not common, but it does happen that when we're having challenges getting a woman's estrogen dose correct, one of the ways that it can be interfered with is this constantly elevating sex hormone binding globulin. What do? We must lower that sex hormone binding globulin. There are things that are purported. There's some herbs, there's some supplements that are purported to lower the sex hormone binding globulin. I've tried many of them. I have yet to find any of them actually work. Wish they did. There is a pharmaceutical medication. It's called danazol. It works.
Yes, you've made
So we
mention.
go on a journey of bringing danazol as one of the team members in treating a woman in menopause who's got an elevated sex hormone binding globulin that's just not coming down and is interfering with her treatment. Not common, but common enough. And when any of the healthcare providers that I'm mentoring present me a case that's got some tricks to it that it's just tough to understand. She's got hot flashes. We're keep increasing her dose. She's got hot flashes. I go, what's her sex hormone binding? And we work on it and we treat, and the treatment is effective. And it's a delicate balance. It's, I think it takes very significant expertise to do hormones correctly, not mediocrely. It does not take much. And a lot of women benefit by minimal treatment. A lot of women were put on Premarin and Premprolone, though I've never prescribed that, and I wouldn't, because there's better options. A lot of those women did really well. There was only 1 or 2 doses. So you never say never, and I never want to discredit something that's had great benefit on this planet. And things have evolved, and better stuff is now available. But yeah, that's what sex hormone binding globulin is, and that's how it needs to be dealt with. And it becomes enough of an issue, and enough women that mandatory in the menopause method, right out of the gate, we look at the blood test the woman has. Invariably, she has not had a sex hormone binding globulin. We send her back to the lab to get drawn and get a sex hormone binding globulin plus 4 thyroids. So, does that answer it, Carolyn? Is there any other?
It does. A question just came up saying I've always used progesterone to get rid of hot flashes. Is this the sex hormone binding globulin being the cause?
That's sort of a different question.
It is.
I have not seen progesterone cause associated with difficulties with sex hormone binding globulin.
Yeah, we've never discussed that ever. Yeah.
And I've never seen it. And doesn't mean it couldn't occur. Like if there were excessive progesterone doses being given, and that's possible. There's some pretty robust progesterone doses being given. And it does, it's carried around by a plasma protein, and sex hormone binding globulin is one of those plasma proteins that carries progesterone around in the cell. That progesterone to get rid of hot flashes, that works in a few perimenopausal women in my experience. And I think one of the reasons it works is that progesterone facilitates the function of estrogen in estrogen receptor sites. Mm-hmm. Can you believe the intricacy? Progesterone also facilitates the function of thyroid hormone in thyroid hormone receptor sites, which is why when progesterone increases mid-cycle, women's temperature goes up, because their thyroid works better because of that facilitation. So this just isn't a theoretical thing. But I was never able to get the level of hot flash alleviation with progesterone alone. No way, no way. And, I think the primary reason that people would so much like to rely on progesterone, we treat everyone with progesterone. I love progesterone. I love it. And we want to get that dose right, and that's for sure. But I think one of the primary reasons people would hope that progesterone would do that is fear of estrogen.
Yeah.
And I would like to say, as I say so many times, do not be afraid of estrogen. It's as lovely, as amazing, as critical a hormone that has ever existed. And your fear of estrogen was based on false information. Women treated with estrogen are at less risk for breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women who are not treated with estrogen. And I'm not giving you the long version of that, but that's why we get questions like, and this, not that Marita is suggesting this, she's not in her question, but whenever I see a progesterone only type suggestion, I think in terms of this fear of estrogen, and it's wrong. So don't fear estrogen, embrace it like manna from heaven. It's like you would embrace progesterone and testosterone. Embrace testosterone, women. It is not a male hormone. I don't want to drift too far.
Yeah,
But perhaps we should go on to the next question, because we could
absolutely.
go down a rabbit hole here.
No, absolutely. This question, I think, is something that you probably could answer. It comes up every once in a while, usually from someone who is new, with many, many blessings to all the new women coming into menopause. And it is, um, how long do we go through menopause and when does this end?
Um, here's the news.
Right.
Menopause begins. Well, let me. There is no end. There is once it begins, it's there for you for every single day you're on the planet Earth. And with no treatment, it gets more intense, more consequential, worse. There is no end.
Right.
And let me give you the overview of the whole thing. Young women, young men, the peak and most robust outputs of all the hormones occur age 20 plus or minus 2 years. That's when you're at your highest level of hormones. From that moment on, your hormones decline, every one of them. And then there's this critical moment where nature seems to be set up that it's no longer the very best thing in the world for women to keep having babies. Maybe it's better for her to be a grandmother. She loses the ability to have babies, and the ovaries stop producing hormones. And man, then that's a rather precipitous drop
Yeah.
in hormones. And then actually the decline continues right on to the last day women are on Earth. One of my colleagues, one of our partners actually, suggests, why is it called menopause? Why don't we just call it hormonal declinopause? Because that describes what's going on.
Yes.
Now, there is some confusion around this, because there's some women in the process of those hormones getting low, but she's still menstruating, even if you're regular, she starts getting raucous symptoms. In fact, 75% of women do. Disruptive hot flashes, mood swings, vaginal dryness. And then she goes through a month or a year or 5 years, and then those symptoms calm down. And she thinks, and this is the big fallacy, that she's through menopause. Wow, that was an experience, but I'm done. And that's very deceptive and very adversely consequential to women, because the hormone decline still continues. But by then, her hormone, 5 years without a period, her hormone levels, her estrogen, testosterone, DHEA, progesterone levels are so low that there is severe biological consequences of that. Women who are having intercourse, they run into those consequences. They have pain on intercourse. They can really feel the difference in their vagina.
Oh.
What women don't see is the changes taking place in their bones. Oh, they're losing bone.
Right.
Oh, I'm through menopause. Bone loss continuing. Oh, what the women don't see is the atherosclerosis that now, without the protection of estrogen, can be developing within them. Atherosclerosis. Half of human beings leave Earth because of consequences of arteriosclerosis. Heart attack, stroke. Woman doesn't see that and feel that at all. Yet I know women who have died.
Yes.
They didn't see the clot happening in their coronary arteries that came from the arteriosclerosis. All of a sudden, heart attack. 2 weeks later, gone from Earth.
Right. Hence,
the women aren't seeing the continual changes of decline of their ability to think or their mood. Although many women are cognizant of that, it's sort of a slow moving process, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you're getting cognitive decline and your family recognizes it. So the consequences of a lifetime of low hormones after midlife are very, very significant. Like, for example, women since I'm a physician, I've had the privilege of working with women at all ages, from delivering babies to women in their 80s and 90s. And I can tell you, as I've said many times, when a woman is 80 years old, her life matters as much to her as it does when she's 20 and 50. And yet they're undergoing changes. I mean, without testosterone, it's a near certainty that they're going to be losing muscle. Well, what's the consequence of that? What are canes and walkers and wheelchairs about? Why are they out there for the elderly? Because they've lost muscle and they can't stand or walk with stability. And that conversion point from walker to wheelchair is one of the most common reasons that women then must leave home. Well, how do women do with leaving home? Well, women are strong in general, and they do what they need to do. But I can tell you, they don't like it.
Mm.
And for many women, it's catastrophic, and for others, they do well. It's even a better situation. That's less common. I'm not here. I have deep lifetime gratitude to the army of the sports staff inside assisted living facilities
Oh, yes.
and nursing homes. These are angels for the most part. Okay, there's a few bad eggs, but there's a few bad eggs everywhere. But my God, this is an army of angels for the work that they do on a daily basis. God bless them. And yet
Absolutely.
at the same time, when you talk to individual women, the majority of them would not like to leave home and go into an assisted living facility or a nursing home. They would like to prevent that. Well, this lifetime of decline of hormones is the principal reason why they go into these assisted living facilities. Loss of muscle mass and loss of bladder control. How does that relate to hormones? Directly. You
Right.
lose muscle that's holding up that bladder and you get vaginal atrophy, you lose the muscle because of the sarcopenia that's occurring all over your body, loss of muscle, but you don't hold that bladder up anymore and you get cough incontinence. You lose your pee and then you lose control. And you put that together with the changes of the vagina, the low estrogen, and you wind up with adult diapers. And,
Right.
and women tolerate this and muscle up and do what but they don't like it. So what am I saying here? Go on hormones.
Yeah.
And the women I'm most concerned about, 25% of American women who go into menopause, and they've had the exact same process go on that the 75% have. 25% of them have no symptoms, and they're looking around and they make statements like, "What's such a big deal about menopause? Muscle up. There's no problem with it." Or I had the mildest menopause and now I'm through it. These are the women I'm most concerned about because they have the same diminishing hormone phenomena that the women who have raucous symptoms have. 75% of women have raucous, life disruptive symptoms. Can't sleep. Try that for a while.
Doesn't work well.
Mood tanking, lose your ability to choose and think. These are big deals. Well, these 25% who don't have symptoms, they are not motivated to go do anything about this.
Right. So wouldn't a woman like that maybe think, oh my God, I'm over it. Thank you, God. Like,
Yeah, right.
Finished. Ugh.
These are the women I'm most concerned about because they still lose muscle.
Yes.
They still eventually go to canes, walkers, wheelchairs, and adult diapers.
Yes.
They eventually go to assisted living. Same thing. So I think it's a miracle of nature that 75% of women get such disruptive symptoms. And what's the underlying purpose for life disruptive symptoms? To get a human being, male or female, to say, what in the heck is going on here? And the issue becomes our beings want the right answer. You don't
Mm-hmm.
want something like, I need a little more carrots in my diet,
Right.
or I need this nutritional supplement called Body Boost or whatever it is. That's not the right answer.
No, no.
We want, that's what these symptoms are about. So if you have raucous menopausal symptoms, celebrate it. Take yourself and your dear ones out to dinner tonight if you can go out of your house.
Right, right, right.
And,
I see it
because it's going to drive you to get the right solution. And
yeah.
here's your job. Your job is to go shopping. Ask all your friends, do you know someone who's good at hormones? Go in the yellow pages, if such a thing still exists. I think they call it the interweb.
I think we saved a copy from 30 years ago. I'm not sure. Well,
And start
okay.
interviewing people and go shopping. Interview office managers until you find a healthcare provider that cares a lot about treating women with compounded bioidentical hormones. And once you find that good person, go on a journey with them. Download our book. You'll get an idea of what that journey should look like. And yeah, I think I drifted from the question.
Well, no, I think that you've answered it wonderfully. A woman goes into menopause, and guess what? For me, Carolyn Shapiro, I never really could understand the word postmenopausal. Just for me, it didn't make sense.
Yeah, it's a misnomer.
Yeah,
It implies that there's a point where menopause stops and it's all over and you're just home free. And that's what's incorrect. That is absolutely not correct.
right. So thank you. There are many, many new women, 6,000, I guess, plus per day that are being diagnosed as being postmenopausal. They're new, they don't know. And it's always appreciated that you don't have a problem repeating this because it's so important for these women to know. I feel.
Yeah.
I really do, with a great kind of like pain in my heart sometimes from what I see. This goes into a whole other world. In our last interview, we discussed the MTHFR SNP, and women were really excited actually to discuss that. And the question came up from a few women. Well, we discussed the MTHR SNP, if I'm saying it correctly. May we then talk about what is known as the COMPT SNP, COMPT SNP? Women have been told that they have that particular, I guess, gene SNP. So we are wondering if one is told that they have this particular uh, gene from mom or dad or both. Is it something we need to worry about? Can we take hormones if we have this?
Yes, that's the answer.
Okay.
And there's this relatively new burgeoning science of gene analysis. And it's fun scientifically, and it's very even exciting to be able to look into the DNA and really define it. And yet, there's ways in which I'm not a fan about it.
Mm,
And because it's uncovering these variants that sometimes are clinically meaningful, and that's fantastic. But a lot of times it's not. And COMT,
sorry, I put the P in there.
yeah, COMT is it's a gene that does what genes do. They guide and determine a biochemical process. For example, the main function of COMT deals, I believe it's with dopamine. And it's how we biochemically transform and utilize and process and eliminate biochemicals, and my God, there's a gene for these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just astounding because as we last week, we never came to the number, I think, of how many different
Boy, did we
biochemical
get some interesting ones, though.
yeah,
Answers.
how many different biochemical reactions, how many distinct biochemical reactions go on in a human body, but it's staggering, and they're all under the guidance of genes. Wouldn't you know, there's a brain for everything that takes place. Well, it turns out that COMT also guides how estradiol is processed in the
Interesting.
body. And what SNP means, it's a unusual rendition of that gene. It's not the obvious, helpful, usual, quote, normal, common form of that gene.
Mm,
Thus, it has the potential, because it's not common, to have a different form of biochemical processing
mm.
of both dopamine and also estrogens. But what it really comes down to is, well, yeah, well, what's the end? What's the end game? How do your hormones look? How does the processing of your hormones look? Well, we can find that we know how to measure that. It's been
Yes.
going on since the late 60s.
Right.
24-hour urine hormones will show you, testing will show you how these hormones are behaving in your body. And that's the final answer.
Yes.
And that's what matters.
Yes.
And it doesn't, to me, how often do we see abnormal biochemical processing take place? Because what I'm looking at, for example, with estrogens is in the 24-hour urine hormone report, we see appear in the urine 3 parent hormones, estradiol, estrone, and estriol. We also see metabolites show up. Metabolites are the biochemical transformed parent hormones. In the process of being utilized, they're transformed and then excreted. So we see 2-hydroxy and 4-hydroxy and 16-alpha hydroxy. These are the most common metabolites. We see the methylated form. Oh, that relates to methyltransferase, MT part.
Yes.
We see the methylated form of the 2-hydroxy, which is pretty easy to measure. The others aren't that easy to measure, even though they're often reported out.
Yes.
So we wind up seeing, are these hormones appearing in the urine in a way that looks healthy and common and is effective? And the vast majority of times we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going on genetic. I'm not going to do a genetic, because we don't know, just because someone's got the COMT SNP, or alternate pathway of getting these hormones processing. That's what SNP translates to. It does an alternative rather than a common way of biochemical reaction. I'm not going on that witch hunt. I want to see, well, are these hormones working and being properly processed?
Right.
And we
Right.
can assess that on the 24-hour urine hormone test.
Right.
We begin to learn clinically whether they're working and whether they're being normally processed.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a woman has hot flashes and we give her hormones and the hot flashes go away, we go, wow, bingo, these hormones are working.
Great feeling, I must
That's
say.
the bottom line. And our objective in a woman who can't sleep because of hot flashes is to get rid of the hot flashes and help her sleep. And replenishing hormones properly will do that in 95% of the cases. So I want to keep our eye on the prize and not get lost in this technical world, which is so easy to do, as fascinating as it is and as expensive as it is. It can really be a black hole. You get in there and you just get confused and bewildered, and you don't have. Now there are things that you can do to facilitate these the abnormal metabolism with some of these. There's supplements that you can take in many cases, but where I begin is if things aren't working, I want to find out why they're not working, because that's ultimately the possible adverse consequence of a SNP, whether it's the MFTHR or the COMT altered way of doing things. I want to know, is there consequences of that really are adverse to my patient? And so if we're treating a woman in menopause and things aren't going well, we do something different than we usually do. What we usually do is we wait to test a woman with a 24-hour urine hormone test when the day comes where she says, wow, I'm 3 months into this, I'm 5 months into this, and I feel better. I think I got my right doses. I think I figured it out. We test 100% of our women at that time.
Incredible feeling.
Because, there are some tweaks that are needed 75% of the women. Even though they feel good, titration is not the final answer. 75% needs some tweaking. But there are some exceptions where we can't figure it out. We're walking along in a process and there's mysteries involved, and we're going to go ahead and test them prior to them saying everything's cool. And sometimes we see in the 24-hour urine hormone test inadequacies, excesses, imbalances that are clinically consequential.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we do the testing, to try and uncover what the heck's going on here. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And rarely, and I mean rarely, we see that the trouble is in how the woman is processing, how she's biochemically transforming or not transforming the hormones. We see abnormal metabolite problems. Wow. So rare, I cannot think, after 25 years, 24 of which I've been doing 24-hour urine hormone tests, of treating women in menopause with compounded bioidentical hormones, I cannot think of a time when I saw a consequence of a COMT or an MFTHR SNP. We do see abnormal metabolizing.
Right.
We see that, I'd say, wild guess, in 5%, 10% of the women that we test. But the elephant in the room for abnormal metabolizing is usually the liver isn't doing its thing properly.
Mm.
And so we ask the question, why isn't the liver handling this properly? And very often there's a trail of tears there of overuse, over-challenge of the liver over years. Excessive amounts of alcohol will do it. Excessive amounts of caffeine will do it. Oh, but here's the big one, the toxic exposure. The liver is the primary organ responsible for handling obnoxious biochemicals that slip into our body and add up. And sometimes it's the toxic biochemicals, and sometimes it's the toxicity coming to the gut. So the common liver issues are coming in from environmental toxicity and overload of the liver, or from a alteration of the normal healthy bacterial flora and other flora in our intestinal tract. This is the common stuff. So sometimes we've got to do procedures to help a woman get her liver healthy. And sometimes in order to get her liver healthy, we have to diagnose and help her work on her intestinal tract. So you can see that although COMT and other SNPs occur, how much do they translate into practical, critical importance for the menopausal women?
Right.
Extremely rare, non-existent in my practice. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist,
Yeah.
but and because there's always all this stuff has meaning to somebody. That's how it came into popular
Music. Yeah.
questioning. It
Yeah.
always is relevant to somebody. I'm not trying to say it's a zero, but
Right.
that's what I have to say about COMT and SNPs.
Well, thank you, because you went into the MTHFR last time, and now you've done the COMT. I always put that P in there, and I apologize. And I think that it was explained well, and I really appreciate it. And I think the women do too, Dr. R, very much so. Our last question, and we have 10 minutes, and that's really we're doing great. Love this. I think we got this down to a science. um, the woman writes in and says, I had a full hysterectomy, and my doctor is giving me estradiol, but I'm now starting to get the raucous, love that word, hot flashes. And I'm wondering if I should raise my estradiol. You make mention all the time of 4 hormones. Interested in those. Um, but my other question would be is estrogen taken alone okay? And should I raise it due to these hot flashes, which is something we visited much earlier in the interview? The continuing raising of estrogen.
Well, you're on your way, and by full hysterectomy, I'm believing you're saying your ovaries were also removed.
Yes.
And you're dealing with one of the most oddball and challenging issues that has occurred in the field of medicine, which I've been deeply involved in for 50 years.
Thank you, God. Yes.
And unlike any other field of medicine, treating women in menopause took a body blow, so to speak, took a hit that makes it a very, very different field of medicine. In 2002, when over 18 million women in America were on a hormone treatment, primarily Premarin and Prempro, and were benefiting from that. That's 40% of American women in menopause. Out comes the Women's Health Initiative study, and it scares women all over the planet Earth to take hormones.
And their physicians. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the point. That's where I was heading, and their physicians. So while so many fields in medicine were advancing with greater expertise and specialization and bodies of knowledge that were so rich, and standards of care were being developed for neurology, for orthopedic surgery, you name it, for internal medicine, for diabetes treatment. None of these fields had controversy in them. They might have mild controversy at the edges, but nothing like menopause. You get this field where people get terrified that if they treat women, they're going to give them breast cancer, which is totally false. The original study never even said that. Yep. That's not what the press got a hold of. That wasn't the headlines. Right. And the original study committee recanted in an article that they published in the same journal in 2016 that after 18 years of follow-up, there was no increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke. Oops.
Yeah.
But hardly anyone's seen that. So this field did not develop. And one of the common misconceptions is if a woman doesn't have ovaries and doesn't have a uterus, she does not need progesterone. So the very first thing that I think needs to be added to your program is adequate levels of progesterone. Mm-hmm. At the same level that there's adequate levels of estrogen.
Yes.
Oh, guess what? The ovaries put out some other stuff too. Testosterone. So crucial. As I was explaining earlier in our Facebook Live today, you get muscle loss. You get to go from a cane to a walker to a wheelchair. You don't have bladder control when you lose your testosterone. Your testosterone is valuable to you as any other biochemical in your body. So it's not just estrogen, though it's a decent start, that is insufficient. You also need treatment with what else the ovary put out, which is DHEA, testosterone, and progesterone. And you need good levels of it. You don't need 20-year-old levels, but you want to get it right. So you need someone who knows what those levels are, knows how to test for them, really understands it, went on to do an informal specialization. Now, in the menopause method, one of our efforts is to create a board-certified specialty in standards of care, but we ain't there yet. And it's not so easy when you go out there looking for a provider that's taken this on as the main thing that they're doing. We're training them, but there's not that many of them out there. They're treating women in menopause as a small part of a broad practice.
Right.
So that's why I'd recommend you download our book, Healthy, Happy Hormones, because we give you a real template of what's going on and what to do with it.
Right. And it's right there at the top of the page, or get with me and I'll get it to you. Yeah.
And estradiol, even, great start as far as replenishing the estrogens. But we believe there's a lot more to estrogen replenishment than just estradiol. In fact, we put a heavy emphasis on adding a second estrogen called estriol, which is breast glandular cell proliferative preventive. We don't want any breast glandular cell proliferation.
Right.
So we use BIAS. We recommend BIAS. So there's filling out of your program, and you'll get the roadmap of it if you read Happy, Healthy Hormones. And then you go shopping. Your job is the same. And don't be discouraged. We're at a funny time in human history. The whole field of treating women in menopause got stunted.
Sadly.
And didn't develop. But they're out there, folks. They're in communities where a nurse practitioner or a physician or a compounding pharmacist who has clinical privileges or advisory privileges really got fascinated by menopause and really got into it. And they got the tool bag.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have the experience that they're going to do a good job with you. So you have one job. Go shopping. And don't stop until you go, wow, not only do I like and trust this professional healthcare provider who has to write prescriptions, by the way, that's why you need a professional. Not only do I like them and trust them, but they really know what they're doing. They care about this. They've gotten advanced education on this. They're gaining experience in this. This is terrific. That's your job. You got to find that person. And you know what going shopping is like. Sometimes you got to go through a lot of stores to get the thing that you want, that you really want. And this is something you really want. So let's say it takes you a year and many different trials and errors to get there, or 2 years or 3 years. Get there, do it. That's your job. Go shopping until you land with a healthcare provider that loves treating women in menopause with compounded bioidentical hormones. That's your job. Well, and that you feel comfortable with.
We're going to be taking these
hormones. A start, but you've probably been told that because you don't have a uterus, you don't need progesterone. Well, I would challenge that majorly. Progesterone, like all these hormones, they have universal effects within our body, especially to mood and bones and attitude and peace and well-being, as opposed to anxiety and depression. Progesterone, go team. And testosterone, oh my God, there's a misconception that's a male hormone. That is not a male hormone. That is a human hormone. And women need testosterone like they need mana. You need air. And you got to you're going to lose it when those ovaries are gone, or even if you went into a natural menopause. And don't worry that you had a total hysterectomy. This is not your issue. For me, when I listen to the actual story of a woman who has had a total hysterectomy or her periods just stopped, quote, naturally, unless I ask specific questions that unveil that she had the surgery, I can't tell the difference.
Right.
So total hysterectomy, yeah, no big deal. I know it was a big deal. I don't mean to diminish the process you
Right.
had to go through to do that. But as far as treating you with hormones, can't even tell the difference unless I ask you or you reveal that you had a total hysterectomy. You're going to behave, your body's going to behave exactly like a woman who went into, quote, natural menopause and her ovaries just stopped.
Yes.
So there, what do you think of them apples?
Lots of apples. Lots and lots of apples. And we made it through this interview, and it was amazing. We answered all the questions well, I might add, and I thank you.
You're welcome. It'd probably be a good place to stop.
Indeed.
I'm going to go over.
Yeah, it's fine. Well,
I
we
want to
got
pause
2
to
minutes.
thank you, Carolyn.
Oh,
Periodically, I really appreciate so much what you've set up here
mm,
and this twice weekly opportunity we have. And to all the women who join us, this is one of my funnest times. I do a lot of fun things professionally. I do a lot of fun things, and this is one of my funnest, if there's
it's
such a
more
word.
funner than anything.
Is more funner.
It
So
is
thank you.
funner, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the women. I remember starting my little page in 2015. Not a clue it would ever end up here. The universe was very kind to me, indeed, you know. So we do have fun, and I think that a lot of women benefit absolutely, and that's the whole reason for doing this, to be quite honest, you know. And so, my dear Dr. David Rosensweet, I wish you a fabulous weekend.
Oh
Joshua
yeah,
and
we that far
everybody.
along. No, we're going to see each other on Thursday.
Oh wait, what is? I can't even think. I'm in this thing for my test. I'm not. All I'm doing is studying, so I can't formulate a sentence other than whatever I'm saying, as you well know. But we won't go there. Uh, Yeah, today is Tuesday. Dang. Well, have a good weekend anyway, but I'll talk to you on Thursday.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Everybody, have a great day, and we'll talk to you in a day and a half ish.